Hello Cloud Gurus, and in this section I'm going to demonstrate working with tables from the command line and console. I'm going to keep it fairly basic for now, as many of the topics we'll cover within this lesson will be covered later in the course in significantly more depth. Let's get right into the demo. You can either just watch this video or you can follow along on your local machine. If you didn't follow along with the last lesson and don't have the weather station data table created, I've included a CloudFormation template which will create the table and set all the configuration options for you, and I'll detail its use shortly. So let's get started. So let's start with the command line. Assuming you followed along with the last lesson, you should have the weather station data table already created. If not, you can either watch me doing this lesson, or you can apply the CloudFormation template attached to this lesson, which will bring you to this stage. So I'm going to demonstrate that now. So I'm going to go to Tables, and I'm going to delete the weather station data table. So make sure Delete All CloudWatch Alarms is selected and click Delete. So I'm going to pause this video until this table delete has completed, and then we're going to use CloudFormation to recreate the table. So the table's been deleted now. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Services, and we're going to locate CloudFormation. So I'm going to open this in a new tab. So now if you followed along with the earlier lessons in this course, either setting up your account, you will have two stacks within your CloudFormation console, Low Admin and Low Machine. So this shouldn't be strange to you, but what we're going to go ahead and do is click Create Stack, and we're going to click the button to say Upload the template to S3, and I'm going to click on Choose File, and I'm going to go to my Downloads folder and locate the course files download that I got in the Setting My Environment Up set of videos, in this case for OS X. If you haven't got this download folder, then consult the OS X or Windows or Linux environment setup videos. So I'm going to click on Working with Tables, and you'll see here I've got a weather station table.json file, and I'm going to select that and click on Choose, and then click Next. And I'm going to call the stack Weather Station Inc. So Weather Station Inc., and I'm going to click on Next, followed by Next again, and Create. So while this is creating, I'm going to open my downloads, and I'm going to find this lesson, which is Working with Tables. I'm going to open the weather station table.json file. And now this is CloudFormation JSON, so it should be semi-recognizable now if you've done the JSON 101 lesson. So this is a JSON file, and as you can see, we're creating a resource here called table, and it's of type AWS DynamoDB table. So this is instructing CloudFormation to make a table resource within the DynamoDB resource set. We're going to call the table weatherstation_data, which is the name that we used in the last lesson. And this time we're setting the provision throughput to have one read capacity unit and one write capacity unit. And we use the key schema block, whose value is an array. And in that array is two JSON objects. The first defines the partition key, station ID, and we use the hash designation, so remember that it's either called partition key or hash key. And then the second is the date and time, and this is a range key type, and if you remember, range is an alternative name for the sort key. And then in the next block, we've got attribute definitions, which is an array, and then we define two JSON strings. And here we set the data type for each of the key values. So station ID is a string represented by S, and date and time is also a string represented by S. So this is a pretty basic example of CloudFormation JSON, but what it's going to do is basically instruct AWS via CloudFormation to make a table called weather station data with these details for performance and these details for the keys. So let's close this down and go back to the console. And as we can see, it's create complete status. So if we go to the DynamoDB console now, we can see our weather station data table has been created. So if we go on dashboard and then tables again, just to show you that it is actually real, and it's got one read capacity, one write capacity, and the correct partition key and sort key. So assuming you've done that, you back up to the point where this lesson begins. Now the first thing I'm going to do is open a terminal. Now keep in mind this is OS X. If you're doing this lesson along with me on Linux, then you've also got a terminal application. And if you're doing this lesson under Windows, you need to use the command prompt. Now a prerequisite for doing this lesson is that you've configured the low admin profile for your CLI tools, and you should have done that if you followed along with the setting up your environment lesson on either OS X, Linux, or Windows. So if you haven't done that, you need to go back and complete that lesson first, and you also, to have done those lessons, need to set up an AWS environment. So I'm assuming from this point forward on the course that you have a working AWS environment, and you've also correctly set up the tools on your local workstation, be that OS X, Linux, or Windows. So if your command line tools are correctly configured, so you should be able to run AWS S3 ls to list S3 buckets, -- profile low admin. And if you're having difficulties, then please post something on the Cloud Guru forums and I'll endeavour to assist. The first thing we're going to do from the command line is we're going to run a list tables operation. And as the name suggests, this should list all of the tables in the current default region within your account. And I'm going to use the command AWS, so this is how you start the AWS command line tools. And the command line tools have the concept of a namespace, so we're going to use the DynamoDB namespace, and then we're going to use the list-tables commandlet, and we're going to set the profile to be low admin. Now if we enter this correctly, what should happen is it should generate some JSON, and the JSON basically has a key called table names, and it should return for table names an array, and for every table that exists in this region in our account, we should have an item in that array. So let's go ahead and run this. And there you can see, so we have our JSON indicated by the 2 curly braces, table names as the key, and then the value is an array. And because we only have one table, we've only got one item in this array, but that is our weather station _ data table. Now we can actually see what other commands we've got available if we type AWS and then DynamoDB and then a question mark. And as you can see, we've got the list tables command, which we've just ran. And we've also got the describe table command, this one, which is the next command that we're going to run to get additional information on our weather station data table. So let's go ahead and run that command. So AWS, again, DynamoDB for the namespace, and then the describe table command. Now this time, the describe table requires a parameter, and that parameter is the table name. So we go ahead and do -- and then table -name, and then the name of the table that we want to describe. And in this case, it's weather station _ data. And again, if we were to run this command without anything else, we would get an error because we need to specify the -- profile option to select our low admin profile. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And now this is complete. And if I go ahead and run this command, so you'll see that it generates a lot more output this time. So what I'm going to do is scroll up first, and we can see if I make the window slightly bigger to make it even easier to understand, it returns a JSON object, which is this outer curly brace, and there's one down at the bottom as well. And then the only key that it returns is this one, which is table. Now the value of this is a JSON object, and we can see, if we scroll down, that we've got a couple of keys inside this JSON object. We've got table ARN, which lists the ARN of the table, and if you recall, you can get that from the console as well. We've got attribute definitions, and that declares the data types of the attributes which are mandatory for the table, and they're obviously our keys, so date and time and station ID, and there's a string and a string. And then we've got the provisioned throughput, and we can see that we've got write capacity units 1 and read capacity units 1. And you'll notice here that we've got number of decreases today. Now in another lesson, I'll detail to you what this means, but basically you can only decrease the performance on a table 4 times in a 24-hour period, a 1 calendar day period, and that's in UTC. So this indicates that I've decreased the performance on this table 0 times, so I've got 4 more times that I can do it before it will start locking me out, and so I can't adjust that anymore. So the key thing here is that by now, after you've done the JSON 101 lesson, you should start to understand how this JSON is put together. And if I smallen it a tiny bit, so we just decrease the font size, hopefully you should be able to see more on screen at once, it should start to become familiar. I don't expect you to write it like this at this point, but you should start to get to the point where you can read and understand it. So the next command I want to show you is the delete table command. And we can delete tables from the command line, and we can create tables from the command line. But let's show you a delete first. So again, I start off by running the AWS command line tools with AWS, and then I go to the DynamoDB namespace, and then I specify the delete-table command. And as with the describe table command, this one expects a table name as a parameter, which makes sense. And logically, we have to specify the profile again. And again, if we run this, it will go ahead and delete our weather station data table. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And again, this is an asynchronous operation. It will go back to the command line immediately. We'll see a table status of deleting, and in the background, that table will be deleted. So we can see in the UI that the change is immediate. So the command line is using APIs at the back end to talk to AWS, the same as this console is. So any commands that we run in the command line are immediately reflected in the UI, which also uses those APIs to access the products. So this will take a few moments to delete. If I click refresh, so there it's gone. And you can see how the command line and the UI share the same style of operation. So if we go back to the terminal, so creating a table from the command line is not really any different from deleting one. The only difference is that the syntax for doing so is a lot more detailed. Now, a lot of the commands within the command line tools can either have parameters specified on the command line, as in with command line switches, such as -- table name, or you can specify JSON on the command line or a file containing JSON to perform that configuration. And the way we specify a piece of JSON to act as configuration for a command line would be like this. So we go AWS, create -table, and then -- CLI input JSON. And we could either specify the JSON in line by using curly braces, or we could specify a file. And a question I'm often asked by students is, how do we know what JSON the command uses in order to be configured? And the way that we can get the command line to tell us that is by using a little trick called generate CLI skeleton. So let me show you what happens. So if I clear the screen to make it easier to see, and I run the following command, so AWS, DynamoDB, create table, and then I do create CLI skeleton, and I still have to specify the profile, so low admin again. Now if I press enter here, what it's going to do is it's going to generate me the JSON that's needed to run a create table command. And I can either look at this on my screen, if I scroll through it, sorry, I've gone back too far. If I look at it on my screen, I can see where it has index name and it's blank and the key schema is blank and the provision throughput 0. But what I can do is I can take this JSON, edit it as per my requirements or as per your requirements, and then I can use the CLI input JSON command to take this JSON and configure the command and create a table. So that's one really useful way in which you can actually get the JSON required to do something, edit it, and then use it as the input for a command. So I'd strongly recommend experimenting with that feature. But for ease of use, we're going to go ahead and use the command line again to do the create table operation. So I'm going to clear the screen to make it easier to see again. And I'm going to type the command out to create a table. And I'm going to do this fairly quickly, and I'm going to explain what each bit of the command does. So I'm going to start off with calling the AWS command, and then the DynamoDB namespace, and then I'm going to run the create table command, and then I'm going to specify the table name that I want to make, and then I need to specify the profile so that we have the permissions required to create a table. Now this is where I want to introduce some new elements of this command. So the first thing we have to do is define the mandatory attributes of the table. And as you know, they are the keys of the table. So the partition key and the sort key. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. And we're going to use the -- attribute definitions command. And the way we do this is we type attribute name equals station ID, attribute type equals string. And then we do a space, and we do attribute name equals date and time, and then attribute type equals string again. And that defines the definitions for our keys on the table. And the next thing, and hopefully you'll start to remember this, the next thing we need to do is define the key schema. So basically inform DynamoDB which is the partition key and which is the sort key. And we do that with the -- key - schema command. And so the syntax is similar. So we go attribute name equals station ID, and then key type is hash. And again, you'll know this is an alternative name for partition. And then we also need to define the sort key. So attribute name equals date and time. And then the key type of that one is range. And we know that range is an alternative name for the sort key. Now, the last thing that we need to do, the last mandatory element of this command, is to configure the throughput. And in order to do that, we go -- provisioned dash throughput. And this accepts some configuration. So we go read capacity units equals 1, and then write capacity units equals 1. And so that's the command. So we've basically specified the table name, we've specified a profile, we've specified the attribute definitions, so the name of the attribute and the data type, and that's for both keys. And then we specified the key schema, so that's the name of the key and the key type, and we've done that for both keys. And then we've specified the provisioned throughput. So we can go ahead and run this command now, and I've corrected this because there was a small typo in provisioned throughput. So if I run the command now, it'll return me to the command prompt. It will give me the information that it's creating the table, and if I go quickly to the UI, I can see that it's creating the table with station ID as string, date and time as string, and one read and one write capacity. And so we can see that a command that we ran on the command line has the same effect as doing it on the console. And the JSON that's returned from this command, it's the same, so we can see that it's creating, we can see the table name, the key schema, the capacity units that we used, and the creation date and time, which was a number of seconds ago. So again, this command is asynchronous, so it will return us to the command line immediately, but the table may take a few seconds or a few minutes to create. So if we go back to the UI and we click on refresh, straight away we can see that it's now active. Now I'm going to demonstrate one other trick with DynamoDB. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to delete the weather station data table again, and then we're going to run the create command. But then I'm going to show you what a wait command does on the command line. So imagine that you're running a script and you want to create a table, and then you want the script to wait until the table is created. For example, if you're going to inject some values into that table. So the first thing is I'm going to delete the table. So if I go back through my list of commands, I've got one there, which will delete the table. So I'm going to run it. And again, it's asynchronous, so that will take some time. So I'm going to clear the screen and just wait for that to finish. So I'll skip to the point when the table's deleted, and then I'm going to make another terminal window. I'm going to make the text big so you can see it again, and I'm going to pre-type a command. So this is going to be AWS DynamoDB, and then I'm going to use the wait command. And then I'm going to specify an option of table-exists. And then I'm going to give it the table name of the table we're going to create. So weather station data. And again, I need to specify a profile to give it permissions. Now, if I run this command, it's going to sit there and it's going to wait until that table exists. So if we go back to the other command line and we run the create table command again, now this will return us to the command prompt straight away, but we know that that table is being created in the background. So if we go back to this window, this has not gone back to the command line. Now it has, and it's gone back to the command line because this table has been created. So this wait command waits until the table exists, i.e. when it's created. So we can use the wait command in scripts to wait until a certain event is true, and I'll demonstrate this command more in upcoming lessons. So now this table's created, I'm going to clear the screen and show you the last command that we're going to do in this lesson. And the last command we're going to run is the update table command, and we're going to use the command to adjust the provision throughput on our weather station data table. So we go ahead, and this should become second nature to you now. So we're in AWS, and we go with the DynamoDB namespace, and we run update-table, and this tells the command line that we want to update the table using this command. And then it expects a table name, so we go ahead and type that again. So weather station data, and this time we specify the provisioned throughput option. And this command expects read capacity units and write capacity units. So we're going to go ahead and set those now, and we're going to set those to 10. And finally, we'll set the profile. And if we run this command, again, it's asynchronous, and it returns us back to the command line, and it shows us that the table is updating. And if we go back to the UI and we refresh, we can see that it's updating. It's got the swirly progress symbol, and you'll see that the capacity is still listed as 1 and 1. I'm going to pause the video now until that's updated. It will take a few seconds. And this is finished now, and we can now see that it's 10 and 10. So the last thing I want to do is delete this table, Cloud Gurus. And we can do that because we created it using CloudFormation. We can go back to Weather Station Inc. We can right-click on the stack, and we can put delete stack and answer yes. And this will go ahead and delete any resources created by this template, and thus by this stack. So that will go ahead and delete the weather station data table. And if we go back to the DynamoDB console and we click on refresh, we can see the table's gone. Now, any lessons where I'm going to use the weather station data table, I will provide you with the JSON to create it as part of either the lesson resources or in that lessons folder in the lesson files that you downloaded from GitHub. So for example, in the next lesson, working with items, we are going to use this table again. And so I'll provide the weather station table JSON, which will allow you to create the table again so you can use it. And at the end of that lesson, you feel free to delete the stack in CloudFormation, and that will tidy up the table. And that just means that you're not sat around with resources consuming your free allocation. Well, that's the end of this lesson, Cloud Gurus. I hope it was useful for those who haven't used the DynamoDB command line before. If you have any questions about subjects covered in this lesson or any others, feel free to reach out directly or via the Cloud Guru forums. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Feel free to complete this lesson and move on to the next.